we're going to look at the North Africa, Southwest Asia realm. I might refer to this as the Naswa realm just for simplicity. Let's look at the physiographic map. We can see that we've already looked at parts of some of the countries in this region, like Chad, and in the last chapter we looked at South Sudan. Here we're looking at North Africa as well as what we typically refer to as the Middle East. We see much of the population concentrated near the coastline, although there are some notable exceptions with some of the inland areas in the northeast. Despite the fact that we think of this region as being dry, we should remember that we have the Nile River, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, and as we've seen in the population map, people cluster around water sources. The Middle East reflects the Western world bias that saw the Near East as Turkey, the Middle East as Egypt and Arabia and Iran, and the Far East as was China and Japan. It can be a useful designation as long as you remember it applies to one of the regions in this realm. We also see this area referred to as the Arab world, but this is a misnomer. Arab is applied to peoples of this area who speak Arabic, but that can't be said for countries like Turkey, where Turkish is the major language. Although there is a high concentration of Muslims in this area, the world's largest Muslim state is actually Indonesia, in a different realm. There are Christian minorities in this realm, and Judaism has a base here as well as smaller religious communities. However, we cannot underscore the importance of Islam to this realm. We see a variety of divisions and factions in the region, including nations without their own states, such as the Palestinians, the Kurds, and the Berbers. We don't really have one dominant state in this realm, but we can view Egypt, Turkey, and Iran, which are the largest, as probably the most important. Since we talked about dimensions of culture already, it might be useful to recall a few concepts we've looked at previously. Cultural geography is the wide-ranging and comprehensive field studying spatial aspects of human cultures. Cultural hearths are those crucibles of civilization and sources of dynamic ideas, innovations, and ideologies. Cultural diffusion is a set of processes that extend the spread of ideas and innovations far and wide. And cultural landscapes represent the form and artifacts placed on the natural landscape by sequential human occupants. Two of the world's largest cultural hearths lie in this realm, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Since many of the early cities of this culture hearth lay in desert territory, it follows that changes in climate would have a real impact on this region, and it may have even destroyed the last of the old civilizations, which allowed them to be taken by nearby peoples. Islam is often seen as radically different than the other two monotheistic faiths, but it shares a common mythology in the Old Testament and sees the Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet in a long line that included Abraham and Moses. Like Christianity is seen as an extension of Judaism, Islam extends both of these faiths. As the major religion of the Nasr realm, it serves as a major unifying force. This map shows us how Islam spread over a period of about 1,000 years, moving from village to village and converting kings, chiefs, and high-ranking officials who propagated the faith amongst the people they ruled. There is a history of conflict between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, much of it due to perceived holy lands valuable to each faith, which now exist in spaces dominated by Islam. The Crusades were an effort to, quote, take back these holy lands, but largely failed. The creation of the Israeli state after World War II as a way of making up for the atrocities that the Jews faced during the Holocaust has been a major source of conflict, as the land that was allocated to Israel was already inhabited by the Palestinians. Islam has not just experienced conflict with Jews and Christians, but internal divisions have impacted it as well. The Sunnis and the Shiites lie at the heart of the conflict. Today, 85% of Muslims are Sunnis, but the Shiite minority has proven to be very strong and has gained a foothold in Iran. We can see a couple of maps. We can see a couple of maps which illustrate the spread of the Ottoman Empire, wherein the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, which is now in modern-day Turkey. It was viewed as the eastern seat of Roman Catholicism, named after the Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity after he saw a vision of a cross before winning a battle. Now Constantinople is Istanbul, and the Ottoman Empire survived for more than 4 centuries after crumbling after World War I. This realm is associated with oil production. About 30 of the world's countries have significant oil reserves. And 5 of these countries, all located in the Naswa realm, possess 57% of the total world's oil reserves. The realm's 3 discontinuous zones of oil and natural gas are in North Africa, the Persian Gulf, and around the Caspian Sea. Here's a map that shows us how many barrels of oil are produced annually in this region. It shows us where the reserves of natural gas are located as well. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter. The effect of oil revenues has elevated some into the higher income category and has also made them globally interdependent. Because the oil-rich countries in this realm lacked the skills, capital, and equipment to better exploit their resources, foreign countries were able to intervene, and this led to a great deal of cultural tensions due to the violation of the tenets of Islam. In this realm, we see fragmented modernization, in large part due to the uneven impact of oil. Some peoples have been strengthened and empowered by oil, and others have been dislocated. Democracy has been rare in this realm because most countries were part of the Ottoman Empire, and their path to independence was similar to what we saw in Africa, when colonial powers left the people unprepared to self-govern, which meant in this realm that military control was almost inevitable. In this realm, we have republics, monarchies, and some are secular, but some function as Islamic states. So, for example, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria are secular republics, while Iran and Afghanistan are Islamic republics. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are Islamic monarchies, while Jordan and Yemen are secular monarchies. We also see in this realm a resurgence of religious revivalism, which is not unlike what we saw in the United States in the 1980s and 1990s with the rise of the religious right and its influence in national politics. We cannot avoid a discussion about terrorism, since this is the region that we most closely associate with global terrorism. It bears reinforcing that most Muslims are not religious fundamentalists, and not all fundamentalists are militants, and not all militants are terrorists. Therefore, views like all Muslims are terrorists are particularly uninformed. The concept of jihad, which is actually the Arabic word for struggle, has traditionally referred to a person's internal struggle, but it's been co-opted by radical extremists to refer to a holy war. But again, we're talking about a minority of very extreme Muslims. Afghanistan has a really tumultuous history that we'll explore in more detail, and we'll see later on how the US actually enabled the Taliban's rise to power. Next, let's look at the regions in the Naswa realm. We have Egypt and the lower Nile basin delineated by my pen and in red on the map. We have the Maghreb and its neighbors, seen in purple and delineated by my pen. Then we have the Middle East, which is this smallish area in yellow, which I'm drawing a circle around. Next we have the Arabian Peninsula in orange, and I'm drawing a circle around that with my pen. Then we have the Empire States in purple over here, coloring that in with my pen as well. And then finally, we have Turkestan in this kind of teal color that I'm also delineating with my pen. The gift of the Nile. So 95% of Egypt's 84 million people live within 12 miles of the Nile itself, or in its delta. Basin irrigation was used until the 19th century when permanent dams were constructed. Despite a large area of farmlands in the delta, this area is at risk due to human and environmental factors, and the subsistence farmers, the fellahin, struggle to make ends meet. Though the economy is strong, there's a major class divide between the wealthy and the poor. Young people lack economic opportunities, and things got to a boiling point with the rise of the Arab Spring in 2011. Protesters demanded the removal of longtime President Mubarak, who eventually resigned, and then the military took control. Egypt is still at a political crossroads as a result. We saw South Sudan in the previous chapter. North Sudan is twice the size of Egypt, but contains less than 40% of the population, and most of its land is desert. Oil reserves were discovered in the transition zone and facilitated the breaking off of South Sudan in 2011. North Sudan is more than 90% Muslim, and South Sudan, like other equatorial African countries, is dominated by Christian and African religions. The text talks about the tragedy in Darfur, where genocide has occurred and the international community has been reluctant to respond. Northwestern Africa, the full Arabic name means the Isle of the West, due to the plentiful rainfall in the Atlas Mountains. Many Europeans, mainly French, settled in Algeria and surrounding areas and were able to employ Mediterranean-style agriculture in this area, so vineyards, citrus groves, olive oil. Morocco is tradition-bound and economically weak. Algeria is a former French colony and suffered a bitter liberation war from 1954 to 1962. Internal conflict has led to many Algerians emigrating to France. Tunisia is the smallest of the Maghreb states, has a higher urbanization level than elsewhere in this region, and in 2011, people revolted against the corrupt government and launched the Arab Spring protests here. Tunisia has had similar problems to Egypt with the recovery from the revolution. Libya lies between the Maghreb states and Egypt, and its economy relies most heavily on oil. The dictator Muammar Gaddafi squashed potential rebellion in the wake of the Arab Spring, and eventually civil war broke out. Mauritania has a population of less than 4 million and is mostly concentrated on its coastal capital. It's known as one of the last places where slavery continued to be tolerated. Mali is a democratic state where a multicultural population is home to the fabled city of Timbuktu. Okay, so the Niger River is pronounced Niger, but the country itself is actually pronounced Niger. So Niger's leading export is uranium. Burkina Faso is one of the world's poorest countries and is plagued by alternating floods and drought. Chad we've looked at briefly before because it's split by the African Transition Zone. So the northern part of Chad is Islamized and has faced problems due to the Darfur crisis spilling over into its borders. Moving on to the Middle East, we first look at Iraq. It accounts for 60% of the region's total area, 40% of the population, as it has most of the area's valuable agricultural and energy resources. Mostly landlocked, modern-day Iraq was home to the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and its geographical bounds with its 6 neighbors have been influential. Iraq was devastated by the U.S. invasion, which began in 2003, which not only affected Iraq, but its neighbors as well as the U.S., searched in vain for Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. The northern part of Iraq, which borders Iran and Turkey, is home to the ethnic Kurds, who have been oppressed throughout history, and they're one of those stateless nations. We've talked before about the Sunni and the Shiite Muslims, and a discussion of Syria is a good time to revisit, since here the Shiite minority rules. The Syrian civil war is an ongoing conflict that arose out of the Arab Spring. The president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, his government has been in conflict with a number of groups, including ISIL. Today you've probably heard about the crisis in Aleppo, where thousands of people have been killed and forced to evacuate. Jordan is Syria's southern neighbor. It lost its window to the Mediterranean when Israel was carved out, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Jordan doesn't have oil resources, so it relies a lot on foreign aid. Its monarchy is pretty widely supported, so it didn't suffer the same upheaval in the Arab Spring. Lebanon has a strategic location and an oil-rich coastline, but it has experienced turmoil as a result of shifting cultural demographics as factions have formed. The instability allowed the Iran-sponsored Hezbollah terrorist attacks to occur, and the country still remains vulnerable to outside influence. Israel was created as a state in 1948 by the United Nations as a homeland for the Jewish people after the devastating Holocaust of World War II killed off over 6 million ethnic Jews. However, the land allocated for Israel included land that had been inhabited for centuries by the Palestinian people. Israel's claim for independence was met with attacks by bordering Arab states, but assistance from Western countries allowed it to persevere. In 1967, Israel took the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, the Gaza Strip from Egypt. The Palestinian people, having their land taken away from them, have become another stateless nation, and they've been living as refugees in neighboring countries, but others remaining in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip where conflict continues. The goal is for an eventual two-state solution, but there are a number of geographic obstacles which may prevent that from happening, and you should read about these in your text. Saudi Arabia occupies most of the oil-rich peninsula, though the large area houses only 30.7 million residents. It is the third biggest state in this realm, behind Kazakhstan and Algeria. The Arabian Peninsula contains the world's largest concentration of petroleum reserves, which has long provided for the country's royal families, but led to disparities between them and the poor. Kuwait almost cuts off Iraq from the sea and is a mini-state with massive oil reserves. Bahrain is an island state ruled by a royal family, and its oil reserves are currently dwindling. It is 30% Sunni and 70% Shiite and has a large foreign labor force. Qatar has a Sunni majority and has capitalized on its natural resources. The UAE is a federation of seven emirates, each controlled by a reigning sheikh. Abu Dhabi and Dubai contain most of the oil reserves, and Dubai has become a center for tourism and trade. Oman is an absolute monarchy that's fragmented into two parts. Yemen, joined by North and South in 1990, has a population of 45% Shiite and 53% Sunni, but terrorist activity and infighting have led to some instability. Moving on to the empire states, we're looking at countries where Islam is a powerful force, but Arab ethnicity melts away. Turkey is a mountainous country, which was formerly the seat of the Ottoman Empire and has had a history of intolerance of minorities, most recently with its harsh treatment of the Kurdish population, which accounts for 1/5 of Turkey's 75.4 million people. Iran was known to the outside world as Persia for centuries and was formally named Iran in 1935. Iran controls the entire corridor between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf, and its ethnic cultural map shows a patchwork of ethnic majority regions. Turkestan refers to the six states of Central Asia and is still an evolving region. Here there is a complex mosaic of peoples and cultures, and during Soviet rule there was suppression of Islam and installation of secular regimes in this region, but Islam is now enjoying a resurgence. Figure 7b13 is a really interesting picture of the ethno-linguistic groups in this region, where political boundaries do not always match the distribution of cultures. Kazakhstan is the giant of this region, borders Russia and China. Its northern part became Russified during the Soviet Union. Uzbekistan borders all of the states of in Turkestan, and Uzbeks make up 80% of the population in Uzbekistan. Turkmenistan has a population of just over 5 million, and 80% of these are ethnic Turkmen. Kyrgyzstan's population is isolated due to its mountains and valleys, and it has a weak agricultural economy. Tajikistan faces similar topographical challenges, and its population of Tajiks are ethnically Persian rather than Turkic, and speak an Indo-European language. Afghanistan, the southernmost country in this region, was delineated by British colonists and the Russians and is entirely landlocked, geographically separated by the Hindu Kush mountain range into 3 distinct regions. It has a complex cultural mosaic, and Afghanistan has no ethnic majority. Pashtuns make up 42% of the population, Tajiks 27%, Hazaras 9%, Uzbeks 9%, Turkmen 3%, and Balukis in smaller groups as well. Afghanistan was a casualty of the Cold War. The Soviets intervened in 1979, and the U.S. got involved in an attempt at containing communism by supporting the Muslim Mujahideen by giving them weapons and flooding them with cash. One of the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, who the U.S. personally assisted, causing the Russians to withdraw. Abandoned by the U.S. once the Russians were gone, the Taliban took hold in the 1990s and imposed Sharia law, and eventually al-Qaeda took root in the country, and Afghanistan became its headquarters. The U.S.'s invasion of Iraq turned its focus to Afghanistan, where the U.S. continues to fight a losing war.